Hey everybody, it's today, Wednesday, April 29th, 2026, and we are covering something that honestly stopped me in my tracks when I first came across it. Because when you spend as much time as I do digging through defense reports, naval intelligence briefs, and geopolitical analysis, you start to develop a sense for when something genuinely matters. And this matters. The UK and Ukraine are preparing to do something in the Strait of Hormuz that even the United States did not see coming. Something so strategically bold, so unexpectedly clever, that it is not just changing the conversation about the Iran war, it is rewriting the entire playbook for who has naval power in this new world. And right in the middle of all of it, Vladimir Putin is sitting in Moscow absolutely furious. Because this move, if it goes ahead, is going to hit his war chest directly. So let's break this down from the very beginning, because to understand why what the UK and Ukraine are about to do is such a big deal, you first need to understand exactly how catastrophic the Strait of Hormuz situation has become for the entire planet. The Strait of Hormuz is 34 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. That is it. Just 34 kilometers of water separating Iran from Oman, and through that narrow corridor flows 20% of the world's entire oil supply, 20% of global liquefied natural gas, and up to 30% of the world's internationally traded fertilizers. Before February 28, 2026, around 3,000 vessels transited that strait every single month. Right now, that number has collapsed to around 5% of pre-war levels. The International Energy Agency has officially called this the largest supply disruption in the history of the global oil market. Not one of the largest ever, bigger than the 1970s oil shock. And when you look at what that has done to the global economy, the numbers are genuinely alarming. Brent crude surged past $120 a barrel in the early weeks of the war. Gas prices in the United States crossed $4 a gallon for the first time in years. Europe's LNG prices nearly doubled. Airlines started adding fuel surcharges. Countries like Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Vietnam declared fuel emergencies. Gulf states that rely on the strait for over 80% of their food imports started airlifting basic staples because supermarket shelves were emptying. So that is the scale of what is broken. The question everyone has been asking since day one of this conflict is very simple: who is going to fix it? And here is where it gets really interesting, because the answer that nobody expected was not the United States alone. It was not the combined power of the Royal Navy and the French Navy alone. The answer that is now emerging, as of this week, is Ukraine. Yes, Ukraine, the country that has spent the last 4 years defending itself against a Russian invasion with drones and courage, is now preparing to send its naval vessels thousands of miles away to clear mines from the world's most important energy choke point. And the UK is right there alongside them, making sure it actually happens. Now let's talk about the ships themselves, because I think one of the things that gets lost in the bigger geopolitical picture is the actual capability sitting in Portsmouth right now, waiting to be deployed. When I went through the technical details on these 4 vessels, I genuinely understood why analysts at Defense One and naval experts covering this conflict have been so emphatic about Ukraine's potential contribution. These are not small patrol boats. These are purpose-built, NATO-trained, sophisticated mine warfare platforms. And together, they represent one of the most capable mine countermeasures packages that any country outside of a major naval power could put into the field right now. So let me walk you through what Ukraine actually has. The first 2 ships are the Chernihiv and the Cherkasy, formerly known in Royal Navy service as HMS Grimsby and HMS Shoreham. Both are Sandown-class single-role mine hunters, built by Vosper Thornycroft and commissioned in the early 2000s. They are 52.5 meters long, displace 600 tons, and have a draft of just 2.3 meters, which is shallow enough to work effectively in the coastal and semi-enclosed waters you find in the Gulf without losing stability in open ocean conditions. These ships are not fast. Their top speed is 13 knots, but speed is completely irrelevant when your operational posture is to hover almost stationary above something dangerous and neutralize it carefully. And the technology on board is what makes them genuinely formidable. The primary detection system is the Sonar 2093 variable depth sonar. What makes this particular sonar so critical for Hormuz operations is right there in the name: variable depth. The transducer head can be detached from the hull and lowered on a cable to different depths, optimizing acoustic performance based on water temperature gradients and thermoclines. This matters enormously in the Gulf, where shallow, warm water creates complicated sound propagation conditions that a fixed hull sonar would struggle to deal with. The detachable head solves that problem directly. One of these ships, the Chernihiv, formerly HMS Shoreham, even has prior Middle East operational experience. Back in 2018, it began a 3-year deployment to the Middle East, where it was tasked with securing shipping lanes for merchant vessels. It has been in those waters. It knows those conditions. That is not nothing. The other two ships are the Mariupol and the Melitopol, both Alkmaar class, also known as tripartite class minehunters, donated to Ukraine by the Belgian and Dutch navies. These vessels have a genuinely fascinating Cold War history. The tripartite design emerged from a 1973 agreement between Belgium, France, and the Netherlands, where each country handled a different component of the shared design. France supplied the mine-hunting electronics. Belgium managed electrical systems and navigation. The Netherlands took responsibility for propulsion. The result was around 40 hulls across 3 fleets, and one of the rare genuine examples of multi-nation shared naval construction from the Cold War era. They measure 51.5 meters, displace around 510 tons standard, and carry comparable mine hunting and neutralization equipment. All 4 vessels are currently docked in Portsmouth. All 4 crews have completed their NATO interoperability assessments. According to Euromaidan Press, which I checked specifically for this, the Ukrainian Navy confirmed the crews are trained and ready. And to add even more capability, the Netherlands is expected to deliver a 5th vessel to Ukraine in June 2026, which will be commissioned as Henichesk. Ukraine's mine countermeasures fleet is not shrinking. It is growing. Now, why does all of this matter specifically for the Hormuz situation? Because the mine threat in that waterway right now is not theoretical. It is documented and actively escalating. On April 10th, the New York Times reported, citing U.S. officials, that Iran was struggling to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, partly because the IRGC itself had lost track of exactly where all of its own mines were laid. Think about that for a moment. Iran laid so many mines so quickly in the early chaos of the war that its own forces cannot fully account for their placement. And then on April 23rd, Axios confirmed something that pushed this situation from serious to genuinely alarming. The IRGC had started actively laying new mines in the strait again. Fresh mine-laying operations, confirmed by a U.S. official and a separate source with direct knowledge, at a moment when a ceasefire is technically still in place. That prompted President Trump to post on Truth Social on April 23rd, ordering the U.S. Navy to shoot and kill any Iranian boat caught laying mines, with, in his exact words, no hesitation. He also ordered U.S. minesweeping operations to continue at a tripled-up level, and confirmed that the USS Chief and the USS Pioneer, 2 U.S. Navy mine countermeasure vessels, were already operating in the strait, alongside underwater drones and specialist mine-hunting helicopters. But here's the brutal reality that the Pentagon itself acknowledged. Clearing the mines from the Strait of Hormuz could take up to 6 months. 6 months, and the U.S. Navy is already stretched thin across multiple operational theaters in the region. This is precisely where Ukraine's 4 mine hunters stop being a symbolic gesture and start being a genuine operational necessity. Iran's specific mines are not the old-fashioned contact variety either. Analysts have identified 2 primary types that the IRGC has deployed. The Maham-3 uses a combination of acoustic and magnetic sensors to detect vessels, and carries a 300-kilogram warhead that can be submerged up to 100 meters below the surface. The Maham-7 is slightly lighter at 220 kilograms of warhead, designed for shallower water, and critically, it has a conical shape specifically engineered to resist standard sonar detection. Both detonate automatically when their sensors are triggered. No contact required. And according to The Guardian, despite the significant losses Iran's conventional navy suffered in the early strikes of the war, it still retains between 80 and 90% of its small boats and mine-laying vessels. It has the means to keep laying them, it has been laying them, and Trump has now ordered American forces to shoot any boat they catch doing it. The variable depth sonar on Ukraine's Sandown-class ships is specifically configured to hunt mines at depths where the Maham-3 operates. The detachable sonar head that can be lowered deep into warm, acoustically complex Gulf waters is not a nice-to-have feature in this environment. It is the difference between finding the mine and not finding it, and Italy has now also confirmed it is assembling a package of 4 vessels for the coalition, including 2 minesweepers, an escort vessel, and a logistics ship, according to NBC News and Reuters. Italy's Navy chief said clearly that his country would not be acting alone, and that other nations would also send minesweepers. The coalition to clean up Hormuz is forming around Ukraine's commitment. Kyiv moved first, Kyiv declared first, and every other nation that followed is building on the framework that Ukraine established at that April 22nd summit in Northwood. The UK has made sure that the ships are trained and ready. France and the UK jointly declared on April 17th that they would establish an international defensive mission for the Strait once a sustainable ceasefire is in place. Over 36 countries have now signed a joint statement expressing readiness to contribute and condemning Iranian attacks on commercial shipping. But it was Ukraine, a country still fighting for its own survival. Against Russia, that stood up first and said, "We are ready." That is not just operationally significant, that is historically significant. And the reason why it is historically significant connects directly to the second dimension of this entire story, which is what this move does to Vladimir Putin and to Russia's war in Ukraine. Now, this is the part of this story that I personally spent the most time researching. Because when you first hear that Ukraine is sending mine hunters to the Strait of Hormuz, your first instinct might be to ask, what does that have to do with the war in Ukraine? What does a mine-clearing operation thousands of miles from the front lines have to do with Russian tanks in Eastern Europe? The answer, once you trace it through carefully, is everything. And I want to walk you through exactly why Vladimir Putin woke up to this news and felt it like a punch directly to his treasury. Let me start with where Russia was economically at the beginning of 2026, because the context here is crucial. By February 2026, Russia's war economy was genuinely starting to buckle under the combined pressure of Western sanctions, Ukrainian drone strikes on energy infrastructure, and the tightening G7 price cap on Russian oil. The International Energy Agency data shows that Russia's oil and petroleum export revenues had fallen to just $9.5 billion in February 2026, the lowest level since Putin launched the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Russian oil export volumes had dropped to 6.6 million barrels per day, again the lowest since 2022. Ukrainian drone and missile strikes on the Baltic ports of Primorsk and Ust-Luga and attacks across the Black Sea had cut physical Russian oil export volumes by as much as 40%, according to Reuters. Russia's GDP had already contracted in the early months of 2026. The IMF's full-year forecast for Russian growth was just 0.8%. Bankruptcies in Russia rose by 31% in 2025 to 568,000 cases. The Russian central bank was keeping interest rates stubbornly high to fight inflation running above 10% in key sectors. Putin was, according to Chatham House's analysis published on April 10th, facing a moment where he might be forced to make real concessions in Ukraine peace talks simply because Russia's economy could no longer sustain the military spending at its current level without sacrificing public welfare. And then, on February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched their war against Iran, and everything changed for Putin overnight. Iran's closure of the Strait of Hormuz triggered the largest oil supply disruption in the history of the global market. Brent crude surged past $100 a barrel, then pushed toward $120. The Financial Times calculated that by early March, Russia was earning an extra $150 million per day from its oil sales purely because of the price spike caused by the Hormuz closure. A senior fellow at the Carnegie Russia Eurasia Center, Sergei Vakulenko, told CNBC that Russia's total windfall from the energy price surge ran into the billions of dollars within weeks. The Kyiv Post, citing Financial Times calculations, confirmed that Moscow had already received between $1.3 and $1.9 billion in additional oil export tax revenues in the first couple of weeks after the Hormuz disruption began. Russian crude, which had been selling at a discount to Brent, was suddenly in some cases being sold to India at a premium to Brent crude, reversing years of price dynamics in a matter of days. Countries that had been dutifully reducing their Russian oil purchases under Western pressure were suddenly scrambling to buy whatever they could get because Gulf supply was offline. Chatham House described the Iran war plainly as an economic gift for Putin. One Russian analyst quoted in that same piece said that before the war, Putin was basically pawning Russia's future to fund the military. With the Hormuz windfall, he no longer had to do that, at least not for now. Now hold that number in your head. $150 million per day in extra revenue for Russia. Every single day that the Strait of Hormuz stays closed, every single day that those mines sit in the water and commercial shipping stays away, Putin's treasury fills up by an additional $150 million that goes directly into funding the war in Ukraine. Every week of Hormuz closure is effectively over $1 billion of extra capacity for Russia's war machine. That is the direct financial link between the mines in the Strait of Hormuz and the soldiers dying on the front lines in eastern Ukraine. It is not abstract. It is not theoretical. It is a direct cash pipeline from Iran's mine-laying strategy to Putin's ability to keep fighting. Ukraine understands this completely, and that is exactly why Zelensky moved so fast, why Ukraine was the first nation to declare its readiness at the April 22nd summit before any other country announced anything. Ukraine has been attacking Russia's energy export infrastructure with drones for months precisely because it understands that hitting Russia's oil revenues is as strategically effective as hitting its ammunition depots. Constant Ukrainian drone strikes on Primorsk, Ust-Luga, and Black Sea export facilities had been steadily squeezing Russian oil export volumes. Ukraine was winning that attritional economic battle. And then the Hormuz closure wiped out much of that work overnight by sending global oil prices so high that Russia's remaining exports became far more profitable than before. Sending minehunters to clear Hormuz is Ukraine continuing the exact same economic attrition strategy, just deployed on a global stage instead of a regional one. When those mines are cleared, shipping resumes, global oil supply increases, prices fall, and Russia loses its windfall. The math is as simple as it is devastating for Moscow. But there is a second dimension to this that goes beyond pure economics, and I think it is actually more significant in the long run. Right now, Turkey's invocation of the Montreux Convention means that Ukraine cannot send its naval vessels into the Black Sea. For Putin, that has always felt like an implicit constraint on Ukrainian naval ambition. Russia devastated Ukraine's conventional Black Sea fleet in the opening phases of the war. Ukraine rebuilt its naval capability through unmanned surface vessels and drone warfare, sinking and forcing the retreat of Russia's Black Sea fleet from Crimea without ever needing traditional warships in those waters. But the Montreux Convention still technically capped what Ukraine could project in terms of traditional naval power. Now, Ukraine is about to send mine hunters to the Persian Gulf, thousands of miles from the Black Sea, thousands of miles from the front lines, coordinating with the Royal Navy, operating alongside French vessels, working with Italian ships, and building defense partnerships with Gulf Arab states. Through 10-year agreements that Zelensky himself confirmed include Ukrainian sea drones. Putin invaded Ukraine expecting to neutralize a regional military power in a few days. Instead, he created something he never anticipated, a combat-hardened, globally connected naval and drone warfare power that can now project capability into the Persian Gulf region. Ukraine does not need the Black Sea to hurt Russia's war effort anymore. It can do it from Hormuz. That is the message this deployment sends. And Putin, who has been watching the Hormuz closure as a financial lifeline, is now watching the coalition that is forming to close that lifeline. A coalition that Ukraine is leading, from British ports, with British-built ships, crewed by Ukrainian sailors trained by the Royal Navy. If that does not keep Putin up at night, I genuinely do not know what would. And there is one more angle here that has not gotten nearly enough attention in the mainstream coverage. Ukraine's commitment to Hormuz is also about something much larger than the immediate military and economic calculus. It is about Ukraine's global reputation and long-term strategic positioning. For years, Ukraine was seen by the world, including by some of its Western partners, primarily as an aid recipient, a country that needed weapons, needed money, needed political support, needed everything. What is happening right now is a fundamental transformation of that identity. Ukraine is transitioning from the country that needed help to the country that can provide help on a global stage. Ukraine is not waiting to be asked. It is volunteering. It is deploying its expertise. It is building alliances not just in Europe, but in the Gulf. It is becoming, right now in real time, a genuine defense and security partner that other nations want on their side. And that transformation is not just symbolically important. It has direct consequences for what Ukraine can negotiate in terms of long-term security guarantees, weapons, deals, economic partnerships, and political standing in every room it walks into from this point forward. So now let's get to the question that I know is sitting at the front of everyone's mind right now. When does this actually happen? When do Ukraine's mine hunters leave Portsmouth and head toward the Persian Gulf? And what happens between now and that moment? Because here is the honest answer based on everything I have personally tracked and researched over the past week. The deployment is ready, the crews are trained, the ships are prepared, the coalition is forming. The only thing standing between those 4 vessels in Portsmouth and the Strait of Hormuz is the political and military situation on the ground in the Middle East. And right now, that situation is sitting on a knife edge. Both the UK and France have been absolutely explicit on this point. Neither country is willing to send ships into the Strait of Hormuz, while there remains a meaningful probability that the Iran war restarts. The ceasefire that was brokered by Pakistan on April 8th is technically still in place as of today, April 29th. Trump extended it indefinitely on April 21st to give Iran time to submit a new proposal. But let me tell you what that ceasefire actually looks like in practice right now, because the word ceasefire is doing a lot of heavy lifting to describe a situation that is anything but calm. The IRGC laid fresh mines in the Strait as recently as April 23rd, confirmed by Axios, citing a U.S. official. Iran seized 2 commercial vessels, the MSC Francesca and the Epaminondas, in the waterway on April 22nd. U.S. forces have physically turned back or redirected 38 ships attempting to enter or leave Iranian waters since the naval blockade began on April 13th. Trump ordered U.S. minesweepers to triple their clearing operations. The U.S. Navy seized an Iranian cargo ship on April 19th. 3 aircraft carriers are now positioned in the Middle East simultaneously. something that has not happened since 2003. Israel's defense minister publicly stated on April 23rd that Israel is prepared to renew the war and is waiting only for a green light from Washington. This is what a ceasefire looks like in 2026 in the Strait of Hormuz. It is less a cessation of hostility and more a heavily armed pause, with both sides continuing to squeeze each other through every available pressure point short of direct strikes. And the peace talks themselves are not providing much reassurance. The first round of direct U.S.-Iran negotiations in Islamabad on April 11th lasted 21 hours and ended without agreement. The second round was supposed to happen, but Trump canceled his delegation's trip on April 25th, citing what he called tremendous infighting and confusion within Tehran's leadership. Iran's foreign minister Araghchi left Pakistan and flew to Oman, then back to Pakistan, then to Russia in a 48-hour diplomatic sprint that I have been covering closely. Pakistan took down all its security checkpoints at the Islamabad summit venue, a visible signal that nobody expected talks to resume imminently. Iran's latest proposal attempts to decouple the Strait of Hormuz from the nuclear question, offering to open the strait in exchange for lifting the naval blockade, while pushing nuclear negotiations to a later phase. Trump has indicated that offer is almost certainly not enough. The core American demand remains a permanent, verifiable end to Iranian nuclear enrichment. That is not something any faction within Iran's current fractured leadership has publicly agreed to. And until there is a genuine, durable agreement on that foundational issue, the ceasefire remains fragile, the strait remains effectively closed, and Ukraine's mine hunters remain in Portsmouth. But here is what I want you to understand about the timeline. The moment a real, lasting ceasefire clicks into place, the sequence of events that follows moves faster than most people realize. The mine-clearing mission does not need to be planned from scratch. It was planned at the April 22nd summit in Northwood. 30 nations contributed to that planning. Ukraine's role is already mapped out. The UK and France are coordinating the mission framework. Italy has committed its 4-vessel package. The Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, which have advanced mine countermeasure capabilities developed specifically for NATO operations, are also in the discussion. The intelligence picture on where Iran's mines are located has been built by U.S. underwater drones, satellite surveillance, and maritime patrol aircraft operating over the strait for weeks. When the signal comes that it is safe to deploy, these ships do not start from zero. They execute a plan that is already largely written. Defense One noted specifically that even the detachable sonar systems on Ukraine's Sandown-class vessels are configured for exactly the acoustics conditions of the Gulf's warm, shallow, thermocline heavy waters. These ships are not being sent to improvise. They are being sent to execute. And then there is the broader geopolitical consequence that unfolds the moment shipping resumes. Oil prices fall. The global energy crisis that has been building since February 28th begins to decompress. Petrol prices in the United States, which have climbed over $1 per gallon since the war started, start to ease. European LNG prices begin to correct downward. Asian economies that have been scrambling for alternative energy sources breathe again, and Russia's $150 million a day windfall starts evaporating. According to Chatham House's analysis, the sustained decline in global oil demand that tends to follow extended periods of high prices could ultimately push oil back toward $50 a barrel or below over the longer term. At precisely the moment Russia is struggling with production constraints, sanctions pressure, and physical export limitations. Chatham House called that scenario potentially devastating for Russia's budget in the medium term. Ukraine reopening Hormuz does not just inconvenience Putin. Done at scale and sustained over time, it strikes at the financial foundation of his ability to keep the war in Ukraine going. Now let me talk about what this means for the bigger picture, because I want to leave you with something to think about that goes beyond the immediate headlines. What we are watching in real time across the Strait of Hormuz crisis, across Ukraine